Lurks hated humanitarian corridors, not because he hated humanitarian work. He'd served the neutral broadcast service for 9 cycles and had grown fond of anything that could be filmed without a death count. He liked orderly footage. He liked clean narratives. He liked endings you could seal with a signature and forget. Humanitarian corridors never gave clean endings. They were fragile promises strung through hostile space like thread across a blade. They were made of paperwork, optimism, and the shared illusion that someone, somewhere, still felt shame. And if something relied on shame to function, it could be broken by any species that had learned to weaponize pride. The glass arc sector glowed like a bruise. The nebulae were thin, the starlight harsh, and the debris fields looked curated, too symmetrical, too evenly spread, as if the universe had paused mid-destruction to lay everything out neatly for a tribunal. At the heart of it floated Mira 7, once a mining node, now a charred skeleton of infrastructure where vacuum flowed through corridors that used to carry laughter, arguments, and the clumsy music of ordinary life. Now there was only the drift of ash and the faint shimmer of melted hull plating. Mira 7 hadn't fallen in a glorious battle. It had been a regrettable escalation event. It had been a loss of control. It had been an unfortunate convergence of miscommunication and strategic necessity. It had been civilians dying in place because 2 governments wanted their borders to look tidy on a map. So the council rushed in, as councils did, to build something that looked like proof of relevance. They declared a corridor. They painted it neutral. They wrote protocols thick enough to suffocate a star. They set up beacons and called them the Grey Keel line. A humanitarian route. A ribbon of safety. A stage. Lurks was assigned to the stage because he was good at pretending the stage mattered more than the audience. The broadcast service claimed neutrality the way an organism claimed oxygen. It was supposed to show what happened, nothing more. But Lurks had learned the truth. Showing what happened was never neutral. Every frame was an argument. Every camera angle was a vote. Even silence in the right place was an accusation. So he did his job with the solemnity of someone placing candles around a bomb and insisting it was a festival. He set drones above the lead tug, above the medical modules, above the habitation blocks welded together from cargo containers because the universe rarely gives refugees the courtesy of proper architecture. He anchored cameras to beacon pylons, tuned their lenses for the dust shimmer, and assigned one drone specifically to the tail of the convoy. The tail was where reality always slipped. The tail was where someone panicked, or failed to maneuver, or decided rules were optional. The tail was where disaster started, and where politicians later claimed they'd had no way to foresee. The convoy moved slowly because humanitarian fleets always moved slowly. Speed required power, required shielding. Shielding required weapons. Weapons ruined the narrative. There were 27 civilian vessels in the column, though vessel felt generous. 3 medical capsules with bright white paint and large civilian markings. 2 habitation blocks stitched from containers like patched skin. A chain of tugs pulling ships that didn't have proper drives anymore. Several small transports so overloaded that their hulls flexed under stress as if even metal could feel dread. Inside, people pretended not to watch the numbers. They pretended not to count oxygen reserves like prayers, pretended not to notice how every adult carried their child's coat even when the child wore it, because hands needed something to hold besides fear. Pretended that temporary relocation didn't always become permanent absence when the wrong government got to define the paperwork. Above them, neutral beacons blinked steady and calm, like eyes pretending not to see what was coming. In the broadcast room, Lurks listened to the chatter of council officials like wind in dry leaves. The council loved corridors. Corridors were good for speeches. Corridors were good for headlines. Corridors were the kind of thing a governing body could point to when asked what it did besides convene. A senior council liaison leaned over Lurks's console and asked the same question they always asked, regardless of context. Can you make it look hopeful? Lurks didn't answer with words. He adjusted exposure and color balance because that was what hope was in practice. A filter applied to suffering. Then the message arrived from the Kralin Dominion. The Dominion was old and proud and obsessed with broadcast optics. It had founded half its foreign policy on the principle that if you look victorious long enough, other species will stop noticing your bleeding. It was the kind of state that commissioned statues during famines, the kind that painted its fleets ceremonial colors so they would look better when they burned. The message was signed by Erden Cairo, Minister of Narrative. Lurks had met many officials with frightening titles, but that one always bothered him. It didn't pretend. It admitted the truth. The Dominion didn't just want victory, it wanted a story. Erden's note was gracious, warm, civilized, full of the correct council phrases. He praised the Grey Keel line as a milestone in interspecies cooperation. He commended the council's moral leadership. He confirmed the Dominion would guarantee non-interference with the humanitarian evacuation because even in conflict, there are boundaries that define civilization. Lurks reread the line about boundaries and felt his plates tighten. The Dominion didn't believe in boundaries. The Dominion believed in cameras. When a predator promises it won't eat, it's usually because it's already decided what it will eat instead. Terra's envoy, Elizabeth Hale, appeared on the feed shortly after. Civilian suit, calm eyes. The kind of person who still believed words could hold the frame together even after the frame had started to burn. That was her talent and her curse. She truly believed in rules, even when rules were already ash. She thanked the Dominion politely, the way humans always did when someone handed them an empty box and called it a gift. She spoke about shared values, about protecting the innocent, about the importance of keeping agreements even in times of tension. She did not accuse, she did not threaten, she did not grandstand. It was impressive. It was also, in Lurks's experience, the exact moment old empires began taking notes. Not out of admiration, but out of irritation. Hale's calm wasn't weakness. It was discipline. And nothing offended arrogant species like disciplined restraint. It implied the restraining party had something to restrain. When the convoy crossed the first beacon, the broadcast service drones picked up a faint whisper on a forbidden frequency. 3 short bursts, irregular cadence, layered under the beacon's navigation chatter like a parasite hiding in a heartbeat. Lurks forwarded it to security. Protocol always demanded it. Protocol was very good at demanding things after it was too late. Security returned an automated response. No threat detected. Signal, likely incidental. Incidental was a word bureaucracy used to mean, if this becomes important, we will pretend we warned you. The convoy moved on. Children stared through windows at the glassy nebula dust like it was snow. Medics checked vitals and oxygen levels and the little red warning lights that never fully went away. Adults smiled too hard, the kind of smile that tries to reassure others and ends up confessing fear. The Council's observer drones captured wide, sweeping shots. The Grey Keel line beacons, the orderly column, the quiet elegance of neutrality in motion. In the broadcast room, someone whispered, "It's working." Lurks didn't answer. He'd been doing this long enough to know that the moment someone says, "It's working," the universe usually takes it as a challenge. The explosion came from the tail. It was clean. Professional. Not enough to annihilate the convoy. Not enough to end the story. Enough to cause panic. Enough to produce wreckage. Enough to force a response. Enough to make the cameras useful. The tail tug spun. A civilian transport behind it jolted off axis and began losing pressure. The feed filled with flashing emergency lights as beings in suits ran through corridors that now sounded hollow with the first taste of vacuum. 6 pirate craft appeared on sensor overlay. No identifiers, no flags, no official tied anything. Small, agile, perfectly positioned. They fired again, not at hulls, but at systems. They wanted disabled ships, not destroyed ships. They wanted desperate faces pressed against windows. They wanted the kind of chaos that made good people look incompetent. Then they withdrew just far enough to keep the threat alive, but the casualties ambiguous. A slow, cruel choreography. The council liaison beside Lurks hissed through clenched teeth. Don't zoom in too much. The public didn't need. The public never needed. The public was always the excuse. Lurks kept the zoom steady anyway. Not out of rebellion. Out of professional instinct. If you stopped filming, someone else would fill the gap with their preferred version of the event. Silence wasn't mercy. Silence was permission. Humans arrived too quickly. Not in the way fleets arrived. Loud, announced, ceremonially aligned for intimidation. The Terran rescue group simply appeared between the pirates and the civilians, like it had always been there. Some species called it human luck. Others called it human paranoia. Lurks called it the natural consequence of a species that had survived on a world where even weather had predatory instincts. The Terran ships moved with a precision that made pirate maneuvers look like drunken flailing. Their counterfire was minimal, almost surgical. Pirate craft went dark one by one. Engines killed, targeting systems muted, comms jammed into silence. No explosions, no heroic flaming arcs across the stars. Just sudden, humiliating stillness. The pirates drifted alive. Alive meant they could be questioned. Alive meant they could be blamed. Alive meant they could become evidence. Hale came on the public channel within the minute. Her tone was steady, but Lurk saw the difference in her eyes. The calm was still there, but it had sharpened. The way a blade looks calm when it's held still. "The Grey Keel line is under attack by unknown hostile craft," she said. "Terra is assuming immediate rescue coordination. We request Council observers maintain full recording integrity. Every second of this will matter." That last line didn't sound like a plea. It sounded like a promise. Erden Cairo went live moments later on a Council-approved channel, with the speed of a being who had been waiting with makeup already on. He expressed deep concern. He offered condolences. He praised Terra's quick reaction. Then he planted the knife. "This incident demonstrates the fragility of relying on a single species for humanitarian security," Erden said, voice smooth as oiled metal. "Perhaps the Council should reassess operational leadership to ensure stability." He never said Terra failed. He didn't need to. He let the viewers say it for him. Lurks felt bile rise. He'd seen this tactic before. It was propaganda built from courtesy. Never overt enough to trigger an official response. Always sharp enough to cut. In the aftermath, when the convoy limped back into formation, two things happened at once. The first was visible. Medics sealing breaches, refugees being moved between ships like fragile cargo, Terran rescue craft holding position with the quiet patience of predators pretending to be lifeguards. The second was invisible. The story began splitting. In one version, the corridor had been attacked by pirates, and brave neutrals and competent humans responded. In the other version, the Dominion version, the corridor proved that humans couldn't maintain stability, and the Council should restore neutral authority, which somehow always meant giving more authority to the people who had the best cameras. On Earth, the Ethics Committee convened. Committees always convened when real decisions threatened to happen without them. They had evolved over centuries into a species of organism that fed on control. Not actual control. The appearance of it. The committee chair spoke first. Mandate, protocol, proportional response. The need to avoid escalation in full public view. They were afraid of two things, and only one was the enemy. They were afraid of Terra becoming the monster in the story. Because if Terra looked monstrous, the galaxy would recoil. Alliances would wobble. Trade routes would hesitate. The moral high ground, that most expensive piece of real estate in diplomacy, would collapse. Admiral Jessica Torres asked for expanded authority, full intercept rights, full counterstrike permissions against hostile sources, a clear mandate to neutralize threats before they touch the convoy again. The committee offered half. Half authority, half clarity, half the ability to act. Half because half looked like compromise, because half made the committee feel safe. Torres didn't argue, she didn't waste breath on persuasion. She simply accepted, the way a surgeon accepts an inadequate tool set when the patient is already on the table. Beside the committee, and not truly under it, existed the Terran Defense Initiative. The TDI was what happened when a species built a moral framework and then acknowledged, quietly, that not everyone would respect it. Marcus Webb led the TDI the way accountants led audits, without passion, without flair, and with the terrifying certainty that numbers don't care who cries. Webb didn't go live. He didn't compete with Erden for narrative space. He asked Priya Okunen, his chief analyst, for a list. Who knew the corridor's exact route? Who had access to beacon recalibration schedules? Who controlled the safety windows the Council loved to advertise? Because pirates rarely found the perfect moment by luck. Priya didn't start with pirates. She started with paperwork. Pirates were symptoms. Paperwork was disease. She pulled access logs from Council beacons. She compared them to schedule changes. She flagged a strange anomaly, a beacon calibration request filed under neutral Council credentials, routed through a relay the Dominion used for cultural exchange broadcasts, a relay that wasn't supposed to touch navigation infrastructure at all. Priya didn't call it evidence yet. She called it a shape. In her work, shapes became knives once you sharpened them with timestamps. Meanwhile, the captured pirate craft were being towed into a neutral holding bay. Their crews didn't look like proud raiders. They looked like contractors who had accepted a job and now realized the client might not pay. Terran Marines boarded one pirate ship. They did it with the calm politeness of people performing a routine safety check. Lurks watched the internal feed because his drones were patched into everything. He told himself it was professional duty. He told himself he needed to know what happened, because someone would ask later. He told himself many things. A Terran sergeant spoke to the pirate captain without raising his voice. "You attacked a marked civilian convoy," the sergeant said. "That is a terrible decision." The pirate captain clicked his mandibles and said, "We were hired." The sergeant didn't react. That was the strangest part about humans. They reacted internally and kept the outside clean. Hired by who? The pirate captain hesitated. Not because of honor, because of fear. Fear had a sound. Lurks could hear it in the way the pirate's breath caught, in the way his eyes avoided the camera. "By someone with council credentials," the pirate said finally. "We never saw them. We saw the code." The sergeant nodded as if that confirmed what he already knew. "Thank you," he said. And Lurks felt the skin under his plates tighten. Humans saying "thank you" in a boarding operation always sounded wrong. Not polite wrong, funeral wrong. The convoy resumed movement. The council issued statements condemning piracy. The Dominion issued statements praising restraint. Terra continued rescue operations while pretending the word pirate didn't taste like a lie. Lurks watched Hale speak in measured tones and saw something else behind her. The humans had been kind. They had been calm. They had left space for dignity, but they were recording everything. Not for revenge, for structure. Humans were frightening when they were angry. They were worse when they were organized. The second strike happened where nobody could call it incidental. The Grey Keel line narrowed into a corridor of overlapping beacon signals. Brilliant, symbolic, and stupidly predictable. A straight lit runway in space perfect for showing the Council's control. Perfect for proving it was only lighting. The strike hit the medical module. Not the tail, not the lead. The medical capsule. White hull, civilian markings, cross-system medical registry code printed in a dozen languages. The blast did not vaporize it. It tore it open. It was a wound crafted for cameras, bloodless enough to show, brutal enough to haunt. The council liaison beside Lurks whispered, "Cut the feed for 30 seconds, just 30. We can blame..." "Blame what?" Lurks asked before he could stop himself. The liaison stared as if Lurks had spoken obscenity. "Technical failure," the liaison said. "Broadcast interference. Anything." Anything meant time to rewrite. Lurks didn't cut the feed. Not because he was heroic. He wasn't. He was a protocol officer with a camera budget. Heroes were expensive. He didn't cut because he knew what happened when you let liars control the gaps. If you cut away, you didn't spare the public pain. You simply allowed someone to decide what kind of pain they would sell. Terran rescue craft swarmed the medical module. Shields flared, not as weapons, but as blankets. Beings in suits moved through ruptured corridors, dragging wounded through airlocks that were no longer doors but thresholds between survival and statistics. In a private channel, Torres spoke 5 words that sounded ordinary and meant everything. Remove remaining restrictions, now. On Earth, the committee tried to say mandate again. The word tasted ridiculous now, like discussing interior design while the house burns. Hale in a private channel was silent a breath too long for a diplomat. It was the pause before humans stop trying to be what others want and start being what they must. Webb asked Priya again, quietly. "The list." Faster. Priya didn't answer with comfort. She answered with data. The beacon recalibration requests were tied to a council staffer assigned to the broadcast service's own oversight chain. Lurks's oversight chain. The name on the request was a mid-tier administrator whose job was to approve signal integrity protocols for neutral broadcasts. Someone who had access to broadcast relays. Someone who had reason to speak to Erden Quiro about public stability. Someone who could claim innocence with a straight face while handing pirates the best angle. Lurks read the name and felt his stomach drop. He knew that staffer. He'd eaten cafeteria ration packs with them. He'd listened to them complain about council bureaucracy. He'd watched them laugh at harmless jokes. He'd never watched them, apparently, when it mattered. In space, the Terran fleet changed posture. Not dramatically. No battle formation theatrics. It simply became harder to approach the convoy without being noticed. Ships that had been not there became there. Drones that had been passive became active. The convoy shifted into an arc toward a nearby debris field, an old orbital graveyard around a dead rock that had once hosted a listening station. Lurks recognized the maneuver. It wasn't a chase. It was shelter. The kind of shelter built by a species that learned long ago that open space was where predators felt confident. In the debris, confidence had edges. Pirate craft attempted a third approach. This time, they didn't get a shot. The first pirate went blind mid-burn. Sensors dead, navigation scrambled, drifting into the debris like a bug into amber. The second tried to run and discovered its engines no longer answered. It drifted, alive, toward a Terran tractor beam that felt like humiliation made physical. The third fired blind, and its shot struck nothing but metal shards and reflected light. The debris field swallowed it slowly, gently, like the universe reclaiming waste. Erden Cairo went live again. He tried to frame the response as overreach. Terra, he said, was militarizing the corridor. The Council, he said, must intervene to restore neutral governance. He spoke as if neutrality was a thing you could restore, like paint. On Earth, the committee began wobbling. They feared the optics. They feared being accused of letting Terra run wild. They feared a political backlash that could cost elections, careers, and the comfortable illusion that ethics were a lever you could pull on demand. They were about to do exactly what Erden wanted: slow Torres down with process. Then Priya delivered the package. Not a speech. Not an accusation. Data. Pirate command keys matched Dominion encryption families. Beacon recalibration requests had been submitted under Council cover, using identities tied to Dominion liaison staff. The timing of safety windows aligned perfectly with internal Ministry of Narrative Communications, down to the minute. The attack wasn't opportunistic. It was scheduled. The committee fell silent because even committees understand one thing. If you ignore evidence this clean, you're not ethical. You're complicit. But committees are also skilled at finding loopholes in their own spines. One member suggested carefully that Terra should avoid direct confrontation and allow Council enforcement to manage Dominion involvement, because direct confrontation might destabilize diplomatic equilibrium. Torres didn't speak to the committee then. Hale did. Diplomatic equilibrium is not a civilian body bag, Hale said quietly. Her voice didn't rise. She didn't threaten. She simply refused to let them hide behind language. The committee chair tried to redirect. We need to consider consequences. Hale's gaze held steady. The consequence is already floating in a medical module, she said. That ended the way truth ends debates, by making everyone feel small and stupid. Hale went public again. This time she did not speak of unknown attackers. She called it what it was without raising her voice. The Grey Keel line has been attacked by assets operating under Dominion-linked access credentials, she said. Terra is continuing evacuation. Council observers will preserve all evidence for tribunal review. Any further strike on civilian infrastructure will be treated as deliberate war crime escalation. Erden smiled on his feed. He tried to. Then he shifted tone. He blamed radicals. He blamed rogue elements. He blamed pirates again with the desperation of someone trying to reattach a mask after it has already been torn. Behind him, the Dominion's fleet finally appeared at the edge of the sector. Not the full armada. Enough to look serious. Enough to intimidate the Council. Enough to make the shot. Admiral Valcor of the Dominion fleet opened comms, demanding Terra cease illegal interference with neutral Council operations. Torres responded in the voice of someone who had stopped believing the enemy deserved interpretive charity. You struck marked civilian medical infrastructure, she said. You used disguised assets to stage attacks for broadcast effect. You do not get to speak of neutrality. Valcor spoke anyway. Empires always spoke anyway. They believed speech was a weapon. He accused Terra of provoking conflict. He demanded the convoy halt for inspection. He demanded Council authority be restored. He was trying to regain narrative control. Torres gave him one offer. Withdraw fleet assets from the corridor perimeter. Surrender pirate crews for custody. Provide encryption keys for immediate verification. Valcor paused. The pause was full of empire, full of the terror of looking weak. Then he ordered attack. And the Grey Keel line stopped being a corridor. It became a battlefield built around a moving line of civilians. The Dominion formed a wedge aiming to punch through the Terran net, get close enough to the convoy to force chaos, force Torres to either retreat or strike hard in full view. Humans broke the wedge into segments. They didn't meet it with a matching wedge. They met it with subtraction. A cruiser in the wedge lost comms, cut off from its escorts. A second lost targeting, forced to fire blind or not at all. A third lost engines and drifted, alive, into a carefully prepared field of disabling fire that left it intact but helpless. Dominion ships tried to switch to backup systems. Backups failed. Not because humans were magic, because humans had been watching their system architecture since the first pirate whisper in the beacons. Valcor demanded a kill shot on a Terran ship to show strength. His channel went dead mid-sentence. He shouted into emptiness, and for the first time in his career, he did not hear applause. The Dominion escalated. They launched a strike package that wasn't meant to win the battle. It was meant to touch the convoy. Touch, in this case, meant one missile in the right place, one hull breach in a habitation block, one child's face in a shattered viewport, frozen into a broadcast frame. Erden needed that image the way lungs needed air. Torres saw the strike package forming and did the most infuriating thing a disciplined enemy could do. She didn't chase it. She preempted it. Terran ships repositioned in a pattern that made no theatrical sense and perfect tactical sense. They formed a moving lattice between the strike package and the convoy, a net of fields and intercept arcs. The first wave of missiles vanished into countermeasures that didn't explode them dramatically. They simply stopped them, turned them inert, made them drift like shame. The second wave lost guidance. The third wave never left their racks because the racks stopped acknowledging their own existence. It was like watching someone win a knife fight by removing the concept of knives. Lurks watched the tactical overlay and realized his fingers were shaking. Not because of fear of death. He'd lived near enough to war to accept death as a possibility. He was shaking because he could see what the Dominion could not. This was not Terra trying. This was Terra restraining itself while winning. And restraint is what you do when you plan to survive your victory. When the Dominion lost a third of combat capacity without gaining martyr footage, Valcor requested talks. Hale accepted talks. The Committee on Earth nearly fainted with relief. A surrender could be packaged. A tribunal could be filmed. A clean ending could be written. The Dominion offered capitulation terms framed as stabilization. They offered cooperation, observers, reparations, and the delivery of pirate leaders as scapegoats. Erden appeared one last time with the face of a peacemaker. Shared future, lessons learned. A renewed commitment to civilized conduct. He did it live, of course. He couldn't help himself. He needed to be seen ending the story. Hale refused to give him that ending. She didn't insult him. She didn't debate him. She simply spoke in the tone of a person reading terms on a contract. Full disclosure of Dominion access logs. Full surrender of all individuals tied to corridor attacks. Immediate cessation of hostile fleet operations. Council embedded observers in Dominion communications infrastructure. Erden's smile tightened. That was the closest he ever got to anger in public. Valcor tried to negotiate. Hale did not. Torres stayed off the public channel, but her ship stayed in place, and that was the only negotiating posture that mattered. The Dominion capitulated. Publicly, the galaxy exhaled. The Council congratulated itself. The broadcast service finally had footage it could play without gagging. Lurks, recklessly, almost believed it was the end. Then the attempted assassination happened. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a plasma bolt in a conference room. It was cleaner than that. The kind of accident that looks like equipment failure unless you know where to look. A docking collar malfunction, a pressure differential, a seal unexpectedly failing during a routine shuttle transfer. Hale's shuttle would have been vented into space, and the Dominion would have apologized, and the galaxy would have mourned, and Erden would have had the perfect final act. Look how dangerous it all is. Look how tragic. Look how unavoidable. But humans had a habit. When they walked into rooms, they watched the exits first. Terran security caught the anomaly in the collar's telemetry a fraction of a second before failure. The collar locked down. Emergency shutters slammed. Hale's shuttle jerked in place, intact. The malfunction message reached the Council as a routine error. The underlying sabotage signature reached Priya as a confession. And when Priya traced that sabotage back, it didn't lead to pirates. It led to a Dominion diplomatic aid embedded with Council logistics. The same kind of polite face that smiled through meetings, the kind of face that made you trust paperwork, the kind of face you only notice after it tries to kill someone important. Hale didn't go public with the attempt. She didn't give Erden the spectacle. She simply sent a private message to the Council chair. If your neutrality includes hosting assassins, you are not neutral. You are complicit. The Council chair responded with outrage, because outrage is what institutions do when cornered. But the council also did something else. It began quietly searching for a scapegoat. Councils loved scapegoats. Scapegoats were the nearest thing bureaucracy had to blood sacrifice. Lurks felt that shift the way you feel air pressure drop before a storm. He was broadcast service. He was close to the feed. He was close to the evidence. That meant he was close to becoming convenient. In the broadcast room, the liaison who had begged him to cut the feed earlier approached again, softer now. "We may need to limit distribution of certain recordings," the liaison said. Lurks asked, "Which recordings?" The liaison didn't answer directly. They never did. Directness created liability. The ones that might inflame tensions. Inflame tensions was another way to say, prove we failed. Lurks looked at the feeds. The medical module breach, the pirates drifting disabled, the sabotage signatures, the time-stamped statements from Erden Kuro. "These recordings don't inflame tensions," Lurks said. "They document them." The liaison stared at him with the expression of someone watching an employee forget their place. "Do you want the council to collapse?" Lurks wanted to say yes, just to see what the liaison would do with honesty. He didn't. He was still a neutral officer. He said, "I want the council to stop pretending optics are governance." The liaison left with the kind of silence that becomes paperwork later. Meanwhile, the war shifted into its second, quieter phase. The Dominion had surrendered publicly, but surrender didn't remove intent. It only changed methods. Erden Kuro had lost the corridor story. He needed a replacement narrative, something that made him look like the rational actor, and humans look like the destabilizing force. So he tried to do what narrative ministers always did. He tried to write the investigation. He launched a public campaign claiming the pirates were freelance criminals, unaffiliated with the Dominion, that Terra had fabricated linkages to justify military dominance, and that the council should sanction Terra for overreach. It was a clever move for anyone who hadn't been watching the logs. Unfortunately for Erden, humans were watching the logs. Priya built the case like a machine assembling a weapon. She mapped pirate encryption to Dominion crypto families. She cross-referenced beacon calibration requests with Dominion liaison travel schedules. She traced the money. The money was the funniest part. Not because it was amusing, because it was banal. A shell company. A cultural outreach fund. A public stability grant. The same kind of financial sleight of hand every empire used to pretend dirty work was philanthropic. Priya showed Webb the flowchart. Webb nodded once, as if ticking off a checklist. Then he sent one message to a set of systems most people never thought about until they stopped working. Insurance, shipping certifications, banking compliance, fuel allocation agreements. The Dominion's war machine didn't just run on pride, it ran on logistics, on credits, on parts, on the quiet, boring bloodstream of civilization. Webb didn't cut the Dominion's throat. He tightened the Dominion's belt until it couldn't breathe. Dominion fleets began reporting maintenance delays, not because their engineers were incompetent, but because their suppliers suddenly could not verify compliance. Their fuel contracts were temporarily suspended pending audit. Their shipyards faced unexpected regulatory freezes as council observers demanded full transparency. Erden Kuro raged on broadcasts. He called it economic warfare. He called it coercion. He called it proof that humans were tyrants. Webb did not respond publicly. He didn't argue with someone who lived on applause. He simply changed the conditions under which applause could be purchased. On Earth, the Ethics Committee was furious. They hadn't authorized economic pressure. They hadn't authorized non-military coercion. They hadn't authorized any of the quiet tools Webb was using. They demanded Webb appear before them. Webb did, because Webb understood a useful truth. Committees can be managed if you feed them facts in the right order. He stood in front of their cameras and did not smile. A committee member accused him of undermining diplomacy. Webb replied without heat. "Diplomacy relies on the assumption that the other party wants peace," he said. The Dominion wanted footage. Another member said, "You're destabilizing the region." Webb nodded. "Yes," he said. "So they can't stabilize it around civilian corpses." The committee chair warned him about precedent. Webb said, "The precedent is already set. A medical module is open to vacuum because someone wanted a better angle." Silence fell. Committees don't like silence. Silence can't be minuted properly. Hale supported Webb, not openly, not with a grand endorsement, but with a simple sentence that landed like a weight. "The Dominion treated neutrality as staging," she said. "We are refusing to be extras." Torres, when asked, offered only operational language. Civilian evacuation succeeded, she said. Hostile capacity reduced. Threat of repeat corridor attack neutralized. Neutralized was a carefully chosen word. It meant, we stopped the thing that mattered. It did not mean, we forgave. The council chair tried to salvage authority by announcing a formal tribunal process. Erden Caro immediately praised the tribunal because tribunals were excellent theater. They had podiums, they had robes, they had the illusion of accountability without the discomfort of consequence. Erden thought he could survive a tribunal the way he survived everything, by shifting blame, by offering scapegoats, by controlling tone. He didn't understand what humans did to tribunals. Humans treated tribunals as work. They weren't interested in the speech, they were interested in the record. Priya submitted evidence packets so thick the council's archival system flagged them as a storage hazard. Timestamps, metadata, chain of custody records, security footage, pirate comm extracts, financial trails. Lurks watched the packets go in and realized something grim. This wasn't just a case. It was a map of everyone who had touched the knife. Not just who stabbed, who sharpened, who handed it over, who looked away. Erden Caro tried one last maneuver. He offered to resign publicly as a gesture of goodwill in exchange for immunity and a truth commission that he would, of course, help shape. Hale declined. Torres didn't respond. Webb responded privately through channels that didn't carry emotion. No immunity, the message read. You filmed a crime. Erden's government began to fracture. At first it was subtle, officials refusing calls, generals pretending to be busy, ministers suddenly sick. The kind of bureaucratic weather that always precedes a storm. Then it became visible. An interim coalition within the Dominion announced administrative restructuring to comply with tribunal expectations. Erden went on air to denounce it. His feed cut out mid-sentence due to verification error. It wasn't dramatic. It was worse. It was boring. Boring was what happened when an empire stopped being able to pay for drama. That night, the Dominion's capital did not burn. No banners fell in flames. No statue toppled in slow motion. No crowds roared in the streets. Instead, systems paused. Broadcast keys failed authentication. Military channels returned polite access errors. Financial grids inserted holds and audits. Personnel databases flagged certain officials as pending review, which in bureaucratic language meant no longer protected. Erden woke to find his ministry's doors had been sealed, not by soldiers with rifles, but by legal notice, digitally signed and already distributed to every relevant agency. He called for his security detail. His security detail answered with procedure. He demanded his diplomatic channel to the council. The channel requested verification he could not provide. He attempted to rally allies. Allies avoided him the way they avoided plague. Outrage requires an audience. His audience had been reassigned. By morning, the council received an official packet from the Dominion. Signatures, deliveries, confessions, a request for broadcast reform assistance. The language was immaculate. The kind of language that doesn't come from persuasion. It comes from inevitability. On Earth, the Ethics Committee erupted again. They demanded to know if Webb had orchestrated the Dominion's internal collapse. Webb didn't deny. He didn't confirm. He stated the same thing humans always stated when forced to admit uncomfortable reality. We did not remove their government, he said. We removed their ability to lie without consequence. The committee chair said, that's the same thing. Webb looked at them with a calm that felt like fatigue hardened into principle. No, he said. The same thing would have been bombing their capital. Silence. Again. The committee had no comfortable place to stand. Either they condemned Webb and looked like they were protecting the Dominion's narrative machinery, or they accepted Webb and admitted the moral framework they preached depended on teeth. Hale asked Webb privately, quietly, like a person trying to keep a human shape around something that wanted to become steel. Was this necessary? Webb answered with the calm of someone who is buried enough to stop negotiating with repetition. If you leave them the instrument, they will film this again, he said. If you leave the director, he will write a second season. Hale had no diplomatic counter for that, because diplomacy is the art of words, and sometimes words are only decorations on the truth. The evacuation completed. The civilians passed the Grey Keel line and vanished into safer systems, where children could look out windows without it feeling like goodbye. The council made a speech about unity. The Dominion signed reparations and called it reflection. Torres repositioned ships quietly. Hale issued a clean statement about values. Webb did not appear on camera because causes rarely need applause. Lurks filed the recordings, closed the archive, and signed the incident as concluded. Then he sat alone in the broadcast room staring at dark monitors. He thought about how the cameras hadn't saved anyone. The cameras had simply ensured the lie had timestamps and coordinates. They had turned tragedy into evidence. They had made the Dominion's narrative a dossier. He understood with the bleak clarity of someone who has watched too many wars become entertainment why humanitarian corridors always made him uneasy. Because corridors promise a path to life. But what they truly promise is this. If someone turns civilians into content, content becomes evidence. The corridor remained on maps as a route, and in minds as a rule. Cameras don't save. Cameras only record who answers later.